What comes to mind when you think of the best rivalries in football? The usual suspects, right? Cowboys, Eagles, Bears, Packers, I guess. Ravens, Steelers, the Jets hitting 500 on the season, Falcons, Saints, Bills, Dolphins. With some exceptions, most of these are very good rivalries that are often watched by millions on Sundays. But to me, one rivalry stands above all the rest in terms of the thrill and the absurd. None before can compare to the incomprehensibility of Seahawks-Cardinals. Did you guys know the Seattle Seahawks and Arizona Cardinals used to play in different conferences? That's right. Outside of their inaugural season, Seattle had played in the American Football Conference from 1977 to 2002. That season, the addition of the Houston Texans into the AFC moved the number of teams the NFL had to 32, thus forcing a division realignment which brought the Seahawks into the NFC. The Cardinals at this time were playing in the NFC East, which clearly didn't add up since they were located in the West. So the NFL relented and moved them to the NFC West so that the East could actually have teams from the East like the Dallas Cowboys. Joining the Rams and 49ers in the NFC West, the Seahawks and Cardinals started playing each other twice a season in 2002, but they had faced each other 6 times prior to the division realignment. The Cardinals won the first 2 games of the series while playing in St. Louis, an incredible feat considering they were also playing baseball at the time. Then they moved in 1988 and rebranded as the Phoenix Cardinals and won some more games against Seattle, then rebranded as the Arizona Cardinals in 1994 and won some more games against Seattle. Then, after 6 straight wins, Seattle would finally respond with a blowout win in 1998 to mark their first win in what would eventually become a rivalry. Which brings us to 2002, where the Seahawks changed their logo, and thank God, because the old one just might be the most depressing football logo I've ever seen. Anyway, the 2 teams split the series in their first season as divisional rivals. Arizona won the first divisional matchup between the 2 in Week 2, while the Seahawks forced a blowout in Week 10. Whereas the Cardinals dominated what little quality time these 2 teams spent together in the 20th century, the Seahawks spent the beginning of the 21st century kicking the shit out of the Cardinals. From 2002 to 2007, Seattle led the division matchups 8 games to 4, and with teams led by QB Matt Hasselbeck and MVP running back Shaun Alexander, there was just no way the Cardinals could compete. So the Cardinals decided it was time to compete. Let MVP quarterback Kurt Warner take 3 years to return to MVP form, and let him cook to Larry Fitzgerald and Anquan Boldin. The Cardinals, for the first time in franchise history, swept the Seahawks in 2008, and then they did it again the following year. Now, both the Seahawks and Cardinals would end up losing Super Bowls to the Steelers in the 2000s, but now is not the time to get into that. These 2 rivals had their own respective playoff runs, but in terms of an actual rivalry, it was kind of forgettable. There was a close game every now and then, but these were far from the best divisional games of the decade. 2010 hits. The entire NFC West is entering laughable lengths of disaster as no team finishes with a 500 record or better. But someone has to win this division, so the 7-9 Seahawks with first-year head coach Pete Carroll not only become the league's first ever sub-500 division winner, but even upset the defending Super Bowl champion New Orleans Saints in the wild card round. Seattle swept the series this season against the 5-11 Cardinals, who went 1-5 against divisional opponents on the year following the retirement of Kurt Warner. The next year, 2011, the Seahawks finished 7-9 again, but thankfully this was not enough to win the division and they missed the playoffs. The Cardinals topped them by finishing 8-8, and this, thankfully, is also not enough for the division or a postseason appearance. But at this time, the games between the two teams were getting closer and closer. The Seahawks in Week 3 scooched by the Cardinals in a 13-10 home victory with a last-second interception. And in Week 17, with the playoff fate of both teams already decided, none, they got together and just played some great football. With 8 minutes left in the fourth, Ricardo Lockett pulled in a mega bomb of a throw to tie the game at 20 apiece. In overtime, Larry Fitzgerald added a witch-like one-handed snag to his endless reel of highlights to put the Cardinals in field goal range, where a perfect 28-yard field goal sealed a condom-tight win for Arizona. It seems to me that the early 2010s were marking a turning point in this saga, and soon, better times would come. When the Mayans prophesized the end of the world in 2012, they were really prophesizing the coming of a new age. And when they foretold said coming of a new age, they really meant that the Seahawks-Cardinals rivalry would truly take off as perhaps the most underrated rivalry in sports. I'm not kidding. Well, except for the Mayan part, but if you haven't watched any Seahawks-Cardinals games since 2012, holy shit, my friend, you're in for a treat. Opinions differed on the Seahawks and Cardinals entering the third year of the 2010s. Out of 23 analysts at ESPN, just one had Seattle even claiming a wildcard spot. From that same ESPN media room list, the 49ers winning the West was unanimous, and hey, they ended up doing that to be fair, but no one had the Cardinals making a playoff appearance, so they looked to prove their critics incorrect. Meanwhile, the Seahawks drafting Wisconsin quarterback Russell Wilson in the third round, believe it or not, was seen as controversial at the time, as they had signed Packers quarterback Matt Flynn in the offseason to be the presumed starter. The team's draft class was getting so panned that Bleacher Report actually graded the class with an F. But with a strong preseason, Wilson became the opening day starter, making his debut, naturally, against the Cardinals. The game was a tight defensive stronghold. A go-ahead touchdown from backup QB Kevin Kolb to Andre Roberts put the Cardinals up 20-16 with 5 minutes left. But with the aid of 2 defensive pass interference calls, Wilson and the Seahawks offense drove down to Arizona's 4, where 2 straight incompletions set up a 4th and goal from the same spot. On the final play of the drive from the 4-yard line, Wilson's pass to Braylon Edwards, yes, that Braylon Edwards, was accurate, but he just could not bring it in, allowing Arizona to escape with a home victory. Keep the last 2 words of that last sentence in mind. We'll come back to it real soon. The Cardinals, who everyone counted out in the playoff picture, followed this win with a league-shattering road victory against the Patriots, and wins against the Eagles and Dolphins propelled them to 4-0, their best start to a season in franchise history. This was a team no one believed in, and they improbably drifted into uncharted territory as a result. So, where would Arizona take the surprising turn in success? 5-11. That's right. They were one of 3 teams to not even make it to 500 after that good of a start, and the only ones with double-digit losses. The team finished second last in scoring and in yards produced, but at least they had one more win in them after starting the season off with 4 of them. Was that one against the Seahawks? No. The 2012 Seahawks used their much maligned draft class to produce something special. As it turned out, Russell Wilson's otherworldly scrambling ability and deep passing brilliance was a perfect fit for the run-heavy offense led by beast mode himself, Marshawn Lynch. And behind the famous Legion of Boom secondary, the Seahawks defense fielded its first of 4 consecutive seasons as the NFL's #1 defense, only the second time this will ever happen. This was a bloodbath of bloodbathic proportions, and when Pete Carroll made it even bloodbathier by running up the score with less than 3 minutes left, I'm sure people had opinions about this being classless and a disgrace to the game. And they're wrong, this shit was hilarious. This Week 14 matchup had no chance of being close. As soon as the first points were scored by the Seahawks, you could have put in the mercy rule right after and wouldn't hear a complaint from me. The score of 58-0 is the fourth largest shutout in NFL history, and a clear indicator of how opposite the two directions of these franchises were going. The Cardinals, who started 4-0, now needed a new coach, a new quarterback, hell, a new coaching staff altogether. The Seahawks, who started 4-4, won 7 of their last 8 games to secure a wild card appearance and scratch the surface of the Super Bowl contending lottery ticket. Hype for the Seahawks was peaking in the 2013 offseason, with many picking them to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. The Cardinals, recognizing this, knew changes had to be made at head coach and quarterback in order to challenge the Legion of Boom. So in that offseason, they hired Santa Claus Bruce Arians, the reigning coach of the year after an interim stint with the Colts. Arians prided his offensive philosophy on risking it for the biscuit, so Arizona traded for Raiders quarterback Carson Palmer. This move might have seemed questionable at the time, as Palmer wasn't really putting up NFL MVP numbers in a baseball stadium. But as his Cardinals Ring of Honor accolade indicates, the team was getting that massive upgrade they were looking for. It just didn't seem that way in Week 7. Thanks to 7 sacks, 2 takeaways, and efficient, explosive play from Russell Wilson, the Seahawks moved to 6-1 on the year with a commanding 2-score victory under Glendale's Thursday Night Lights. And if you think the 7 sacks is a franchise record for Seattle, it's not, it's 11, but 7 is still a lot, 7 is still a lot. And any quarterback that gets hit that much has thoughts of immediate revenge fueling in his blood. Let's fast forward to Week 16 at CenturyLink Field. The Seahawks at 12-2 are hungry for the NFC's #1 seed, as well as home field advantage throughout the playoffs. A win would all but guarantee them NFC dictatorship past January. The Cardinals, who won 7 of their last 8 games to improve to 9-5, would be eliminated from playoff contention with a loss to Seattle. The Seahawks in the Russell Wilson era started out with 14 straight wins at home, having been famous for hosting the 12th Man, a loud, ravenous crowd of grungy Seattle fans notorious for causing minor earthquakes after big touchdowns. In other words, the Cardinals, a 9-point underdog, were entering the toughest road scenario in football. This was impossible territory, and the Seahawks defense, allowing just 17 points, was once again up to the task. Carson Palmer was intercepted 4 times, but good God, that wasn't enough. The Cardinals defense put up a dominant display of their own, just barely allowing Russell Wilson to reach 100 passing yards while limiting Marshawn Lynch to under 100 on the ground. A 5-minute drive culminated in a game-winning downfield dime from Palmer to Michael Floyd in the end zone, and then a weird-ass interception from Carlos Dansby off Wilson. I love this. How was this picked? How was this picked? Ended up sealing a massive victory for the Cardinals. For the first time since 2011, a team beat Seattle on their home turf. Sure, the Cardinals got their 10th win and they certainly weren't a slouch, but as far as everyone was concerned, this was one of the biggest upsets of the season. The deadliest home field advantage now had an Achilles heel. Sadly for the Cardinals, this turnaround was not enough in a stacked NFC, and their push for a playoff berth came up just short. Nevertheless, the improvement that this team had made was substantial, and they had the building blocks for sustainable. And then the Seahawks won the Super Bowl. The NFL's best defense neutralized any threat they had in the postseason, and against the highest scoring offense in NFL history, destroyed the Broncos in the biggest blowout victory from an underdog in Super Bowl history. This dominant team's quest for a title during their early 2010s rebuild was now complete. Many predicted the Seahawks would repeat as champions the following season. But to do that, they would have to get some wins against the Cardinals and quarterback Carson Palmer. A torn ACL and a non-contact injury against the Rams in Week 10 ended Palmer's season, and thus the Cardinals had to rely on backup Drew Stanton in the Week 12 matchup at Seattle. The Red Sea defense came out ferocious, sacking Russell Wilson a career-high 7 times, and yet the Seahawks won 19-3. I can't oversell how rare this kind of win is. It's one of 9 such games in NFL history where a team allowed 7 or more sacks and 3 points or less, and the most recent game of its kind to date. Luckily for the Cardinals, this is about to get absolutely so much worse. See, injuries to Stanton forced them to rely on the colossal legend himself. I'm of course talking about future Hall of Famer Ryan Lindley. I mean, look at how calm and happy he looks in all these photos. How can you not sense confidence from him? Basically, a Cardinals win means clinching the NFC West and home field advantage, and Lindley knows that. Everything's going to turn out fine. Through 3 quarters, this game is actually sort of close, as Seattle only leads 14-6 entering the final 15 minutes. That brand of obvious false optimism fades away to the surprise of no one, as Seattle scores 21 unanswered points to sweep the series in a blowout victory, helping them to take over the NFC West and secure home field advantage. And in this game, we also had one of the most spectacular runs of Marshawn Lynch's career. Let us listen and let the play do the talking.
Lynch, he stutter steps, breaks through the line, makes a man miss, cuts back outside right 30, 35, 40, down the far sidelines, pushes a defender, keeps fighting, he's still moving, he's going to go, down to the 20, the 15, they're chasing him 10, he dives in, are you kidding me?
What a
Touchdown, Seahawks! Holy catfish, 79 yards, and that made Beastquake look like a walk in the park.
Though the Cardinals started the season 9-1, injuries to Carson Palmer and Drew Stanton caused the team to collapse to an 11-5 finish. Still good enough for a postseason berth, but just not enough for the NFC West. They used that berth to field the fewest yards from any offense in a postseason game, also managing to lose to a sub-500 Panthers team in a matchup. What the absolute hell. The Seahawks, on the other hand, made it back to the Super Bowl. And while they came up short this time, at least they managed to lose it in the way that was so forgettable hardly anyone would have noticed it. Something incredible was happening to the Cardinals in 2015. With Carson Palmer healthy, the team stormed out to a 6-2 start. And with the aid of the Seahawks transforming into the Suckhawks, had a 2-game lead on their fellow crackhead rivals entering the highly anticipated Week 10 matchup, which was to be under Seattle's Sunday Night Lights. Now obviously, something was also happening to Seattle. They started 2-4, with all 4 losses a result of blown 4th quarter leads. Wins against the Jim Tomsula 49ers and the Tony Romo-less Cowboys got him back to 500, but this was not the same dominant team we'd seen the past 3 seasons. Having said that, this was the toughest stadium to win in, and once again, these Cardinals were ready. With Palmer in the middle of an MVP caliber season, they were itching to scratch the Seahawks defense and claw them into pieces. With his fantastic crew of vertical stretching receivers, Palmer was making incredible throw after incredible throw, and Arizona cruised to 19 unanswered points. Seattle looked absolutely defeated entering the second half, but remember, this rivalry is on crack, cocaine, and morphine, so this is not going to last. The Seahawks trailed 25-10 with just over 6 minutes remaining in the 3rd quarter, but scored 19 unanswered points to take a 29-25 lead with 13 minutes left. This was aided by 2 Palmer strip sacks in Cardinal territory that resulted in a red zone touchdown and a defensive one as well. The crowd at CenturyLink was wired, and not in a coffee or narc kind of way. Momentum looked like it had shifted over to Seattle, who had appeared to remind the Cardinals who really owned the NFC West. And then you remember this is the Seahawks-Cardinals rivalry we're talking about. Palmer was once again carving up this legendary defense and ended this 83-yard drive with an absolute seed. On Seattle's ensuing drive, the Cardinals responded by putting the game away for good, as Andre Ellington broke free on this run for 48 yards in the score. The Seahawks took a minute to get any points on the next drive, settling for a field goal, but this was all they could do as Arizona made a statement victory that catapulted them to 7-2. They would ride this incredible success to an additional 6 consecutive victories, doing so before resting their starters early in Week 17 and losing a meaningless blowout that honestly isn't worth getting into. To the Seahawks. That Sunday night loss woke up a sleeping beast in the 4-5 Seahawks, who won 6 of their last 7 games to surge into a playoff appearance behind a legendary 5-game stretch from Russell Wilson. Wilson became the first player to throw 3 touchdowns and no picks in 5 straight games, and he was finding himself making a case in the MVP conversation. The gods were on their side, as evidenced by Blair Walsh missing a 9-inch field goal near the end of regulation, which sent the Seahawks to the divisional round. Their Cardinal rivals made it to the conference title after a thrilling overtime win against the Packers, but unfortunately for Seattle, their quest for a 3rd consecutive Super Bowl appearance would end there. The team's attempts at coming back from a 31-0 deficit were valiant, but they also weren't enough, as the Panthers made it to the NFC Championship game where they also kicked the absolute donkey shit out of the Cardinals, whose offense was now struggling thanks to an injured finger from Palmer. Both the Seahawks and Cardinals had their Super Bowl aspirations come up just short, but to me, that's not important. Okay, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's important. It's obviously really important. It's the most important goddamn thing. It's the most important fucking thing. But listen, this rivalry is about to dive in the deeper depths of hellish confusion, while also ascending into heights of heavenly bliss. It's time to travel to October 23rd, 2016. Now, keep in mind, for anyone who gambles, the over and under for this game was 43.5, and these two teams combined for 6 points entering overtime. So if you bet the over on this game, I'd advise not asking you for any financial advice, or really any kind of advice. Both teams kicked field goals to increase this high-scoring showdown to a 6-6 thriller. Then, the Cardinals appeared to have the game on ice after driving to the Seattle 1. As we know, a game involving Seattle in the 1-yard line results in very normal and mundane plays occurring. That's when the Cardinals took a delay of game because I guess they wanted to, but whatever. That's perfectly fine because this is a chip shot 24-yard field goal for Chandler Catanzaro, and Arizona would escape this game with a 9-6 victory. This is the Seahawks-Cardinals rivalry. This is supposed to happen. With a lucky break, the Seahawks are able to escape Glendale with a 9-6 victory, improving to a 5-1 record.
John Ryan to hold. And he misses it. That's impossible. Oh, my God. That is impossible.
They both missed. They both fucking missed. Are you kidding me? No. As I said, this is Seahawks-Cardinals football. I hope now you not only understand the depths and heights this rivalry travels to, but also appreciate the privilege in getting the wisdom that is knowing that this rivalry makes absolutely no sense. The Cardinals get the ball back, but with 7 seconds left, there's no time for a proper Hail Mary, and the game ends in a 6-6 tie. Ties happened all the time before overtime came to be in 1974, so we're going to exclude those games from this upcoming study I just mentioned. In the overtime era, this is the lowest scoring tie in NFL history, with 12 combined points. Keep in mind, this is 2016. Games usually average somewhere between 30 to 50 points being scored. But this is not that. If you're expecting good football here, you're an idiot. But if you're expecting transcendent football that elevates you into new spiritual heights, you get the Seahawks-Cardinals rivalry, which is about to get even weirder. Week 16, the Seahawks have the NFC West locked up at 9-4-1, while the 5-8-1 Cardinals have been eliminated from any playoff spot. You wouldn't be wrong to assume this game would be meaningless, except that's just not scientifically possible in the realms of this rivalry. A win helps push Seattle closer to chaining up a first-round bye for the 3rd time in 4 years, but they'll need to score more than 6 points to do that. Entering the fourth quarter, the scoring has indeed improved from the 6-6 tie the last time these two faced off. It's 14-10 Cardinals. It's a pretty mundane, dull affair of football. However, both teams combined for 41 fourth quarter points. It's often said that doing the exact same thing multiple times and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. These two teams tried different things, got different results, and they're still insane. With 4 minutes left, the Cardinals had a seemingly insurmountable lead in their grasp. But what have we learned from these two so far? Nothing is a given, wins don't exist, there's no such thing as closing out a game in this realm. Closeouts are not real. Paul Richardson is camouflage on this touchdown connection as there were no defenders near him, and the Seahawks will get the lead pending the extra point kick. The game is still tied. The game is still tied. With that in mind, Palmer drove the Cardinals down to the 25. Kicker Chandler Catanzaro sought redemption for his overtime shank 62 days prior. It was time for retribution. Now, to have a perfect kick down the middle doesn't feel like the Seahawks-Cardinals game I'm used to. I always expect the unexpected. The implications this game had were crazy. The Falcons were able to use the Seahawks loss to clinch a first-round bye and get supreme home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Is it possible that this game caused 28-3? I'm just saying. Like, the first 5 years of the Russell Wilson era came with an unprecedented degree of home field advantage. The Seahawks started off this era undefeated at CenturyLink Field in 2012 before finishing with a 26-6 record at the end of 2016. And 3 of those losses came to the Cardinals. The Seahawks, who managed to beat teams like the Tom Brady Patriots, Colin Kaepernick 49ers, Drew Brees Saints, Aaron Rodgers Packers, Peyton Manning Broncos, and Cam Newton Panthers without much of a problem. But the Arizona Cardinals, the forgotten part of football, that's just too much. Now, in all seriousness, Carson Palmer was one hell of a QB during his time in the desert. And a season-ending injury against the Rams, again, jeez, this guy's always getting injured against the Rams, was the last we'd see of him as he drove off into retirement after 2017. His Cardinals teams had always owned the Seahawks in Seattle, and without him, this rivalry would flip the page to another chapter. Fast forward to 2017. It's Week 10 in the Desert Dome on a Thursday night, and these two face off in another primetime affair. The Seahawks would win this 22-16, but the score was a lot closer than it actually was. So yeah, there's not much for this game to celebrate. Except for this.
Wilson's got space. Got nobody downfield, though. Making it up. Do the circus music. Wilson throwing from Baldwin. Oh, my goodness, he caught it. And there goes Baldwin down the sideline. Vintage Seahawk play. Baldwin out of bounds inside the 5. Unbelievable stuff.
Unbelievable stuff indeed. It just goes to show that even in a regular game between these two, something you've never seen before is always going to happen. Both of these teams would hit the 500 mark this season. The Cardinals would miss the playoffs at 8-8, while the Seahawks needed a win and Falcons loss to secure a playoff spot. Without an actual running game beside him, Russell Wilson scored 37 of the Seahawks' 38 touchdowns in 2017, and many considered him part of the MVP conversation till the very end. In Week 17, with these two facing off in Seattle, the Seahawks truly had something to play for. A playoff spot. Yeah, pretty crazy. They usually have it locked up around this time. The Cardinals, despite being eliminated, also had something to play for, as this would be Bruce Arians' last game as head coach of the Cardinals. He was arguably the greatest coach this generation of Cardinals fans had ever seen, and a win in the regular season finale would mean the world to this locker room. The stakes were different, that's for sure, but both teams had something to play for. Like the previous matchup in Seattle, the Cardinals had a 2-score lead entering the fourth quarter, though this time the Seahawks made sure that evaporated quickly and took a 24-23 lead with 600 seconds to go. The two teams would trade 3-and-outs, and the Cardinals, with under 7 minutes left, would drive down to the 24-yard line, where a 42-yard kick from longtime Cleveland Brown Phil Dawson went smoothly, giving the Cardinals a 26-24 lead with 2 minutes and toll chains left. Here's the problem if you're the Cardinals. A field goal by the Seahawks obviously gives them 3 points in the win, so they have all sorts of time plus the MVP caliber quarterback in Wilson to get this done and secure a playoff spot. Connections to Doug Baldwin and Jimmy Graham helped drive the Seahawks to the Arizona 30, and on fourth down, they would have to rely on It's Blair Walsh. Oh my God, it's Blair Walsh. If you'll recall, Walsh was the very same kicker who missed the routine game-winning field goal just a year and a half prior in a wild card game against Seattle. And somehow, that miss led him to the Seahawks. You know the Thanos meme where the guy's failure led him back to Thanos? He'd have a chance to make a name for himself if he were just able to make this kick. Plus, Blair Walsh can't miss badly again, right? And he missed it. This is the most Seahawks-Cardinals game ever. Bruce Arians gets his last win in his last game as head coach of the Redbirds. And the Seahawks, needing the kick to go through to get in, missed the playoffs for the first time in the Russell Wilson era. Except even if Walsh made this kick, the Falcons won earlier, clinching a playoff spot and thus eliminating Seattle from postseason contention. This kick was meaningless. All right, back to Cardinals Seahawks. You may have noticed something from the last 5 years worth of matchups between the two, and it's that the home team never wins these games. Between 2013 and 2017, Seattle was 4-0-1 at Arizona, while Arizona was 4-1 at Seattle. The road team, as a result, was a combined 8-1-1 in these 10 games. Road field advantage is what I like to call it. You could bet easy money on the road team securing a victory. This is something I've never seen in any other rivalry, and a big reason why I wanted to do this study. After all, this is something that has existed since the beginning of time. What happened when these two teams met for the first time in 1976? The Cardinals won at Seattle. What happened during the division realignment in 2002 when these two were realigned to the NFC West and faced off as division rivals for the first time? The Cardinals won at Seattle. Where did Arizona play at in 2021? In Seattle, and the Cardinals won. Home teams really aren't home teams in the Seahawks-Cardinals rivalry. The Cardinals need a new face to take on Seattle, and with rookie quarterback Josh Rosen under the helm, the Cardinals struggled, finishing last among all teams in record in 2018. 3 wins, 13 losses. But of course, 2 of, or at least one of those wins had to come against the Seahawks, right? Let's take a look. The Seahawks had 10 third down attempts in this Week 4 matchup and failed to convert once. They won. That's so stupid, and leads to an interesting question. How many other teams won games in spite of failing to convert a single third down? Surprisingly, while it's rare, it's not quite as rare as you'd think. Pro Football Reference's data in this department goes back to 1991, and it's happened 23 times. Hell, Seattle actually did this in 2020 against the Vikings. Anyway, you can stop me here because you've heard this before. A Cardinals-Seahawks game goes right down to the wire and must be decided by a game-winning field goal. After Phil Dawson's game-winning attempt sails wide right, it's Seattle's turn. This time, the Seahawks are relying on longtime Raider and former first-round pick Sebastian Janikowski. As you can see, this kick is sailing wide left. There's no chance it curves back inside, and so the field goal is good as time expires, giving the Seahawks a 20-17 victory. I expected that. So Seattle won in Arizona. Again. They didn't lose for the 6th straight time there. Amazing. But now, they would have to win against Arizona in Seattle. This time, the Seahawks came prepared, already having a playoff spot locked in. The Cardinals, despite being the worst team in the league this year, of course, make this a close game that goes right down to the wire. Trailing 21-13 just before the 4th quarter, the Cardinals block a punt and recover it in the end zone for the touchdown. Somehow, according to Pro Football Reference, a 2-point conversion never happened, and they magically got 8 points off that block punt. Hey, in all fairness, if I were commissioner of the NFL, this would not change. The Cardinals can only watch as Janikowski attempts the game-winning 33-yard field goal. Of course, this is the Seahawks-Cardinals game, so a field goal this routine misses. Janikowski does, and the game goes into overtime. Nah, just kidding. He actually makes it in the most boring way imaginable. So, we are seeing something that rarely happens between these two. the Seahawks winning a home game against the Cardinals. Not only that, but they swept them. But it's not enough that the Seahawks won these games. It's that they needed the leg of a 40-year-old Polish piss missile master as time expired to win both of these games. And it was against the 3-13 Cardinals. Almost losing to Steve Wilkes and Josh Rosen twice taught the Seahawks a very valuable lesson going against the new duo of Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury. Near the end of the first matchup, they wasted 8 minutes of clock in the fourth quarter to go up 3 scores on a touchdown before ultimately winning by that margin. Somehow these two teams played in a pretty ordinary blowout, but of course it was done by the road team winning, so it's not ordinary. It was not ordinary at all. The Seahawks are really good in 2019. They're 10-2 with 4 games left, and they seem poised for not just a first-round bye, but the number 1 seed and home field advantage, something they had not had since 2014. I mean, yeah, they lose to the Rams, but they also rebound the next week with a win at Carolina, leaving... no. It happened again. The Cardinals beat the Seahawks at Seattle. Again. And this time, a game at CenturyLink did not go down to the wire, as Kyler Murray and the Cardinals won with a 2-score victory that sent the Seahawks into a late-season collapse. One where they'd make the playoffs, but lose the number 1 seed, a first-round bye, and the NFC West, all to the 49ers. Now, did I say Kyler Murray and the Cardinals? Sorry. I meant Kyler Murray, Brett Hundley, and the Arizona Cardinals. Yep, the Seahawks also lost at home to the backup. I can't believe this. It happened again. It happened again. In fact, why even have home stadiums? Why even have them? The Seahawks play in Arizona and the Cardinals play in Seattle. The Cardinals have the 12th man and the Seahawks have a roof that opens and closes. Many people drew comparisons between Murray and Russell Wilson, as both are short, athletic, have big arms, and are, with 2 of the league's most exciting scrambling quarterbacks in the same division. We just can't wait for what's to come. You know how up to the 2020 season the Seahawks and Cardinals just refused to win at home for reasons only known to the Seahawks and Cardinals? Well, that year something called a coronavirus prevented fans from attending games that season. You've probably heard of it. This coronavirus eliminated home field advantage altogether. Wait. Holy shit, these are the colors of the Cardinals. Would this affect the road field advantage both teams had? Only one way to find out, and it was in Week 7 in Glendale. This Sunday night showdown had major implications in bragging rights, as the Seahawks started the season off hot at 5-0, while the Cardinals started off 4-2 and were keeping pace with their grungy brothers in the NFC West race. A win would not only end the Seahawks' quest for perfection, but put the Rojo Birds 1 game back of the division. As per usual, shit beamed the fan. Before we get to the end result of this play, I just want to shout out Russell Wilson for throwing one of the worst interceptions of his lengthy career. Cardinals safety and not religious leader Budda Baker was wearing camouflage, as Wilson just could not see him as he threw this floater into low gravity. According to Next Gen Stats, Baker accelerated to a top speed of just over 21 miles per hour on one of the fastest runs of the season. This, of course, was good for a pick 6. On most plays. Yep. Baker's run wasn't even the fastest on this play, as Seahawks receiver DK Metcalf, who looks like this, sprinted after the safety like the T-1000 at over 22 miles per hour and somehow prevented a pick 6 in one of the greatest tackles in NFL history. Having said that, the Cardinals, who trailed 10-0 at one point and were now down 13-7, had a goldmine chance ahead of them to take the lead. So they turned the ball over on downs. Nevertheless, the scoring continued, both teams trading blows like they were at Tony Montana's house. The Seahawks had a 2-score lead at 4 different points in the entire game, yet the Cardinals always had an answer, to which the Seahawks had an answer. The Seahawks, with less than 7 minutes remaining, stuck a dagger into Arizona with his toe-tap touchdown from receiver Tyler Lockett, a player known for sweeter feet than Rex Ryan's wife. The Cardinals had to act quick if they had any chance of getting back in this game. With 6:44 left, they had to get moving. Quick scoring down 2 scores this late in the game is crucial, so when you have a 16-play drive like the Cardinals just did, you have a problem. They just refused to take shots down the field and gave it the Seattle strategy of taking anything underneath. All in all, the Seahawks did their job, holding the Cardinals to a field goal to make the score 34-27. Except that didn't happen. Defensive end Benson Mayowa jumped off sides and had leverage, 2 things that are not allowed in the NFL rulebook. The leverage penalty was accepted, and the Cardinals went after the touchdown with new life. 2 plays later, that's exactly what they got, and the lead was down to 3. The Cardinals defense was able to force a punt with 59 seconds to go. With a few seconds left, they're just able to spike the ball, and the 44-yard kick by Zane Gonzalez is drilled to send this game into overtime. The Cardinals look to finally get their first home win against the Seahawks in 8 years. All Zane Gonzalez had to do was nail this kick from 41 yards, and he missed. This gives the Seahawks a golden goose egg of an opportunity to seal the game, and on this play, they do so. Except they didn't. Offensive holding destroyed another highlight reel-worthy play on the part of DK Metcalf. And then, on the very next play, Russell Wilson gets intercepted by a guy who played 5 snaps the entire game. Less than a minute left, and this time, Gonzalez is kicking from 48 yards. The Cardinals did something they never do. They won a home game against the Seahawks. The celebration was on in Arizona. And a couple weeks later, they established themselves at the top of the NFC West after coming away with one of the greatest Hail Marys of all time. 4 days following that, we had another Cardinals-Seahawks game. Seattle had stumbled to 6-3, and with Arizona owning the head-to-head tiebreaker, they were second in the division. And once again, it was right down to the wire. The Cardinals had gotten the ball back after cutting their deficit to 2. From their 14-yard line, they were not in optimal field position, but at least they weren't a couple of yards away from a safety. They gave up a safety. Back-to-back penalties, intentional grounding, and holding in the end zone. Nothing about this rivalry surprises me anymore, and yet, at the same time, it still does. The Seahawks shot and killed off 7 minutes of clock before coming away with a field goal to put themselves up 7. Kyler Murray drove the Cardinals to the Seattle 27 with less than a minute remaining. Unfortunately, this would be all they'd get, as tight defense, drops, and a 4th down sack sealed the Cardinals 4 days as divisional leaders, transferring power back to Seattle. Now, after this game, Seattle would win 5 of their last 6 games to secure the NFC West for good, while Arizona would lose 4 of the last 6 to finish 8-8, missing the playoffs on the last day. But that doesn't matter here. What matters is that these 2 teams did the impossible. They won home games against each other. And that brings us to the present, which is now the past since these games already happened. But that's after somehow failing to beat Colt McCoy at home. Colt McCoy. The Seahawks were tied with the Cardinals in the all-time series. You guessed it. 22 wins, 22 losses, and a tie. That means whoever wins in Week 18 owns the all-time rivalry. What seems like a meaningless game for both teams is, you guessed it, actually quite meaningful. Especially considering all the trade rumors Russell Wilson has been involved in, many speculate this could be his last game with the Seahawks. The Cardinals, though facing a second-half collapse where they fell to 11-5 after starting off 10-2, still clinched a playoff berth and were favored by 5.5 in this one, as they were a home team. With the Rams losing on the same day, a win would clinch the NFC West for these birds. It was time to fight. The series lead was at stake. The Seahawks won. For at least another year, Seattle owns the all-time series at 23 wins, 22 losses, and a tie. Also, if you gamble and want to bet on these games, do not. Here is a comprehensive chart I made of the covers to each game in the rivalry since 2013. In these 18 games, Seattle was favored 15 times, while the Cardinals were only favored in the other 3. Want to know what the record of the favored team against the cover was? 6-12. Yep. 4 of Seattle's losses in this series came from games where they were favored to win by at least 8 points. I'm not sure there's another rivalry in any sport where this has happened. It's as if these teams exist just to steal money from compulsive gamblers. Once again, I'm going to hammer this home. Records do not matter in many divisional games, but they especially mean nothing in the Seahawks-Cardinals rivalry. It took a while for these games to catch steam, but once they did, they featured some of the wildest games of the last decade of football. Expecting a normal blowout or an easy win for your team? No, not happening. Expecting a win at home? You must be a lunatic because it just doesn't exist. Okay, the point I want to get across is this. I love this rivalry. This is my favorite rivalry to watch. It may not have the media legacy many others have, but perhaps it's time it does. It doesn't matter what time of the season. The next time the Seahawks and Cardinals play each other, regardless of record, regardless if playoffs are implied or not, stick around. You just might be watching one of the best games of all time. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.